On the far edge of the desert, where the dunes kiss the foothills and the wind carries the scent of salt from a distant, forgotten sea, there lay a village so small it barely had a name. Its houses were built of clay and stone, their walls the color of sand, so that from a distance the village seemed to grow out of the earth itself. Narrow alleys twisted between the homes, shaded by woven mats that sagged under the weight of dust and sun. Goats bleated in low pens, water jars sweated in the heat, and children once played in the courtyards. But in these days, laughter had grown scarce. Fear walked heavier than footsteps. When the moon disappeared and the night was darker than ink, something came. None had seen it clearly enough to say what shape it wore. Some said it was a lion with eyes of fire. Others swore it was a serpent grown monstrous. Still others whispered it was no beast at all, but a cursed man who had forgotten his own face. They agreed only on one thing. It took what it wished. Livestock were dragged into the dunes, throats torn open, bones scattered like kindling. Sometimes, though few dared speak of it, men and women vanished too. Every family carried its own story of the beast. The old potter swore it had clawed the walls of his kiln, leaving marks as wide as a man's hand. A shepherd's daughter claimed she had heard it breathing outside her tent, deep and slow, like bellows feeding a fire. The blacksmith, a man known for his strength, admitted his hammer hand shook ever since he followed the sound of growls one night and returned carrying only a shredded sandal. Yet for all their tales, no one could say they had stood before the beast and lived to describe it fully. It was a shadow, a rumor, a nightmare that walked. So the people learned to whisper. They believed the beast had ears sharper than knives, and that to speak its name aloud was to summon it. Children were hushed with trembling hands when they cried too loudly after sunset. Songs that once filled the evenings faded into silence. Even prayers were spoken softer, for fear the beast might mistake them for defiance. The market, too, had changed. Merchants who once traveled freely now feared to linger after dusk. Lanterns burned low and early, casting long, quivering shadows across the stalls. Women carried their water in hurried steps, always looking behind them. The men posted guards on rooftops, though their eyes often stayed fixed on the sand rather than the dark horizon, as if refusing to meet the truth. And yet, in every silence, in every fearful glance, the beast grew larger. It did not need to strike every night. Its hunger was fed by dread itself. The villagers began to see its shadow in the flicker of oil lamps, to hear its growl in the wind that rattled their doors. In their dreams, the beast came for them again and again, until even sleep offered no refuge. The elders gathered in the council hut, their faces carved with lines as deep as dry riverbeds. They spoke of what should be done. Some argued for moving the whole village deeper into the mountains, leaving behind their fields and wells. Others urged sacrifices, leave a goat at the edge of the dunes, or even a prisoner from the village jail, to appease the beast's hunger. A few, the most desperate, muttered that perhaps the beast was a punishment from God, and nothing but endless repentance would save them. But when the council ended, nothing had changed. The elders walked back to their homes with shoulders bowed, each man haunted by the knowledge that fear had made them smaller than they once were. The children noticed it most of all. They remembered a time when the adults seemed invincible, their fathers strong enough to split wood with one strike, their mothers fierce enough to wrestle wild dogs from the flock. Now those same hands trembled when the wind howled too long. Those same eyes darted toward every shadow. The beast had conquered more than flesh. It had conquered spirit. And so the tale spread. There is a monster that rules our nights, not in the loud, proud way of kings, not with banners or soldiers, but in whispers. In every home, in every hushed corner, in every heart that dared not hope. And among those whispers, a prophecy lingered, half forgotten, spoken only by the oldest of tongues. When silence is heavier than roar, one shall rise to break the beast's hunger. But no one believed such words. For in that village on the edge of the desert, where fear had made silence thicker than smoke, the people thought only of survival. And the beast, whatever it truly was, waited patiently in the darkness, feeding on their fear, certain that no soul among them would ever stand against it. Night had settled heavy upon the village, a night so still that even the dogs refused to bark. The people huddled in their homes, oil lamps glowing like frightened stars behind shuttered windows. Yet in the council hut, at the heart of the village, an elder still lingered. His name was Sheikh Barzan, a man whose back was bent like a bow and whose beard flowed white as salt. Few remembered his youth, for it seemed he had always been old, always watching, always listening. Some said he had spoken with saints in his youth, others that he had walked the sands until his feet bled and had seen things in the desert no man should see. Most laughed at such tales in daylight, but none dared laugh at night, when shadows pressed close and silence felt like breath on the back of the neck. On this night, as the moon hid behind dark clouds, Barzan gathered the younger men who still had the courage, or perhaps the desperation to meet. They sat cross-legged around a small fire, its smoke curling like a serpent toward the thatched roof. "It cannot continue," muttered Farid, a farmer whose oxen had been torn from their pen only 2 nights past. His fists were clenched, his eyes bloodshot. "Every month the beast takes more. Soon it will be our children. If we cannot kill it, then let us leave. Let the sands have this cursed place." The others murmured agreement, their voices low, as if afraid the beast itself were listening. But Barzan raised a trembling hand. "Listen before you choose the path of cowards," he said, his voice brittle yet sharp enough to cut through their despair. "You speak of fleeing, of abandoning your homes, your father's graves, your mother's gardens. Do you not know what follows those who run? Fear does, and fear is swifter than any caravan." The men fell silent, for though their hearts burned with grief and anger, they could not deny the truth in the old man's words. Barzan leaned closer to the fire. The flames painted his face in crimson and gold, making his eyes glint like embers. "There is a tale," he whispered, "older than these walls, older even than the bones of our village. A tale of a shadow that came before and of one who broke it." The younger men leaned in, hungry not for hope, but for something other than despair. "In the time of our grandfathers' grandfathers," Barzan began, "there was another beast. Some called it a ghoul, others a lion of the underworld. It devoured whole caravans, scattered tribes, made the desert its throne. The people despaired, just as we despair now, but one rose against it. Not a king, not a warrior, but a wanderer, nameless and forgotten by all but the sands. He carried nothing but silence in his heart and fire in his eyes. And when he faced the beast, he struck not with fury, but with patience. For it is written, 'Silence defeats roar.'" The fire cracked, sending sparks into the air like stars fleeing the heavens. The men shivered, though no wind blew. Barzan lowered his voice further, until it was almost a breath. "The prophecy says this: when silence grows heavier than roar, one shall rise again. He will walk between shadow and flame, and by his hand the beast shall fall." Farid frowned, shaking his head. "These are old men's tales. If such a savior were to come, he would be here already. Look around you, Sheikh. Do you see heroes in this village? Do you see men with fire in their eyes? We are broken." But though his words were hard, his voice cracked. And when Barzan answered, his tone carried no anger, only the weight of truth. "Prophecies are not for those who demand them, but for those who least expect them. Do you think a hero is born wearing a crown? No, he is born in silence, in shadows, in scorn. He is born where none would look, where none would believe." The men stared into the fire, each hearing the words differently. To some, they were madness. To others, they were a fragile spark of hope. But none dared speak more, for the night pressed heavy around them. And even in the crackle of the fire, they thought they heard breathing, slow, steady, monstrous. At last, the meeting ended. The men left the hut one by one, their sandals whispering against the dust. Barzan remained alone, eyes fixed on the flames until they burned low, his lips moving in prayers older than memory. And somewhere beyond the dunes, the beast stirred. It did not know of prophecies or heroes. It knew only hunger, yet even hunger in the end must bow to destiny. And so the whispers began again, carried by tongues too afraid to speak loudly, by mothers rocking sleepless children, by shepherds watching the horizon with weary eyes. "When silence grows heavier than roar, one shall rise again." A prophecy half believed, half feared, and wholly alive in the dark. Among the villagers, there was one who spoke even less than the shadows. His name was Kale, though some whispered that he had no true name, for the elders had long forgotten him. Orphaned when he was but a boy, he had grown at the village's edge, dwelling in the half-abandoned huts near the dunes. Children had once played with him, but when their laughter gave way to fear, Kale was left to wander alone, a shadow among shadows. He was not tall nor especially strong, yet his eyes were unusually bright, a clear amber that seemed to reflect even the faintest light. People said he was strange, cursed even, for he did not flinch from the dark as others did. He did not speak much, and when he did, his words carried the weight of the desert wind, sudden, sharp, and fleeting. Kale had listened to the whispers of the village for years, not with fear but with a strange curiosity. He had heard the stories of the beast, of its claws and teeth, its fire-bright eyes, and the terror it sowed. Most nights he lay awake outside his hut, staring at the dunes, waiting for the wind to carry the sound of its approach. And then came the night that changed everything. It was a night darker than any before. The moon veiled behind thick clouds. Kale had been walking along the edge of the dunes, seeking a goat that had strayed from its pen, when a distant roar reached him. Not the roar of anger or hunger alone, but a roar that seemed to echo from the belly of the earth itself, a sound that made even the sand tremble. He did not run. Instead, something deep within him stirred, a pulse, a calling. The whispers of the prophecy returned to him, words he had never believed, yet now could not ignore. When silence grows heavier than roar, one shall rise again. He will walk between shadow and flame. Kale thought of the villagers cowering in their homes, of mothers rocking children who would never see another dawn, of men too frightened to lift their spears. He thought of the fear that had grown thicker than smoke in the village air, and he realized for the first time that someone must rise. Someone who could face the darkness, even if it meant standing alone. He returned to the village silently, his mind set. Passing the council hut where the elders still whispered among themselves, he paused only briefly. None noticed him. Their faces were buried in worry, their hearts heavy with despair. Kale did not seek recognition, nor did he ask for permission. He knew that courage was not found in approval, but in action. By morning, the villagers had gone about their routines with hollow faces, unaware that one among them had resolved to confront the impossible. Kale gathered a few simple supplies, a water skin, a knife given to him by the blacksmith before the man refused to leave his house after the last attack, and a worn cloak to guard against the chill of desert nights. He carried no sword of kings, no armor forged by fire, only the resolve that had long simmered in his chest. As he stepped toward the dunes, a whisper of wind caught the edge of his cloak, and he imagined it as the voice of the prophecy itself, guiding him forward. The villagers might have mocked him, might have called him foolish or cursed, but Kale felt no fear. Only the weight of silence and the memory of the prophecy pressed upon him, a weight that was heavier than the roar of the beast itself. Along the path, he passed fields trampled by the desert and pens emptied of livestock. Every step reminded him of what was at stake. The sand beneath his feet seemed to hum, as though carrying the stories of every traveler who had dared the desert before him. He listened, learning patience from the dunes, strength from the heat, and humility from the whispering wind. By the time the sun began its climb over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold, Kale had made a silent vow. He would not return until the beast was faced, until the roar was silenced by courage, and until the village, at last, could breathe without fear. He was no hero yet, no conqueror forged by battle. He was merely the outcast, the boy abandoned by fate, walking into darkness because the darkness demanded it. And in the quiet of the morning, as the wind swept the dunes like a brush across a canvas, Kale disappeared into the horizon, leaving behind only footprints and a growing sense of hope, fragile, whispered, and unspoken. The village would remember him not in tales of valor or songs of glory, but in hushed voices by the fireside, as the one who dared to rise when no one else could. Kyle walked for many days across the desert, where the sand stretched like a golden sea and the sun painted the horizon in fire. The village disappeared behind him, a distant memory under the heat haze. Only the wind accompanied him, whispering secrets of the dunes and carrying scents of distant places he had never seen. He had no map, no compass, only the faint pull of something older than memory, guiding him forward. The first sign came in the shape of a falcon. It appeared suddenly, gliding across the sky like a shadow with wings of silver. Its eyes, sharp and unblinking, seemed to pierce through Cole's very thoughts. The bird circled once, twice, then dropped a single black feather onto the sand at his feet, before disappearing into the wind. Cale picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It was as if the feather had weight, a weight not of matter, but of meaning. He remembered the words of Sheikh Barzan. Signs will appear to those who dare walk between shadow and flame. This feather, delicate yet dark, seemed to be the first whisper of guidance. Cale tucked it into his cloak, feeling its presence as both warning and reassurance. That night, he camped beneath a lone acacia tree, the stars above like scattered gems across a black velvet sky. Sleep came slowly, and in it he dreamed. He found himself in a vast cavern of golden light, where a sword was buried beneath shifting sands. The hilt gleamed with a faint blue glow, as if calling to him. But when he reached out, the sands shifted again, hiding it from view. He awoke with the taste of sand in his mouth, and the memory of the sword burned in his mind. Cale understood this dream as another sign. He must seek the weapon that fate had already chosen for him. It would not be found easily, for the desert demanded patience, and the desert rewarded only those who could listen to its subtle voice. The days passed, each one a test of endurance and of will. The sun scorched his back, the nights chilled his bones, and the wind carried illusions that seemed real. He often saw fleeting shapes in the distance, a caravan that vanished when approached, a figure at the horizon that dissolved into the heat waves. Once, he thought he saw a great lion crouching atop a dune, eyes glowing like coals, only for it to be a mirage, a trick of thirst and longing. Yet Cale did not falter. He had learned to trust the signs, not the eyes. The next true sign came from the hermit of the high dunes, an old man said to speak in riddles and live on what the desert grudgingly offered. Cale found him seated on a slab of sun-baked rock, a cloak of tattered cloth wrapped around his thin shoulders. The hermit's eyes were pale, almost white, yet they seemed to see everything. "You come for the beast," the hermit said, his voice dry as wind over stones, "and yet you carry no armor, no sword, no fear. That is good. Fear is a heavier weight than stone, but you must gather 3 signs, or your path will be lost." Cale knelt, humble yet determined. "What signs?" he asked. The hermit pointed to the falcon feather, then to the sword in the dream, and finally to a riddle. In the shadow of the tallest dune, where the earth drinks the sun's last fire, there waits what you seek, yet only those who carry silence in their hearts may take it. Cale understood. Each step, each moment of endurance, each whispered guidance of the wind was preparing him. The desert had its own memory, and it marked the path for those who could see it. He left the hermit's side with new resolve, knowing that these signs were not mere coincidence, but destiny's careful hand. He walked on, the black feather tucked safely in his cloak, the image of the sword etched into his mind, and the hermit's riddle echoing in his thoughts. He was no longer a boy wandering aimlessly. He was a seeker, a traveler chosen by prophecy, moving closer to the confrontation that all whispered about but none dared face. And as the sun dipped low that evening, casting long, trembling shadows across the dunes, Cale paused and listened. The wind carried a faint roar, distant yet certain, reminding him that the beast was near. But Cale felt no fear. Each sign he had gathered was a thread in a tapestry he could not yet see fully. Yet he knew it would lead him to his destiny. For in the desert, signs are never meaningless, and destiny always whispers to those who listen. The desert stretched endlessly before Cale, a sea of shifting dunes and burning sun, where every step seemed both a test and a challenge. By day, the heat was merciless, a furnace that made his skin sting and his throat ache. By night, the chill crept into his bones, sharp as the teeth of a predator waiting in the shadows. Each moment demanded vigilance, and every choice could carry him closer to salvation or to doom. The first trial came with the wind. It blew with a voice both cruel and cunning, carrying shapes that seemed alive. Cale saw caravans moving on the horizon, tents waving in the distance, the faint sound of drums and laughter. He ran toward them, heart pounding with hope, only to find emptiness, as if the desert itself had swallowed them whole. Yet he did not curse his fate. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and reminded himself, illusions are the desert's favorite test. Patience, not impulse, was the key. As he walked, the dunes themselves seemed to shift, creating labyrinths that could trap the unwary forever. Cale climbed high ridges and descended steep valleys, his feet sinking into hot sand that threatened to swallow him with each step. He learned to read the patterns of the wind, to follow the faintest traces of movement, to trust not his eyes alone but the rhythm of the earth beneath him. Then came the fire scorpions, creatures spoken of only in whispers, said to guard the desert for those who dared tread its heart. Their bodies glowed faintly red, like embers of a dying flame. Kyle encountered a cluster of them atop a ridge, their pincers snapping with the crackle of burning wood. One wrong move, and they could strike with venom that could paralyze a man in seconds. Cale did not attack. Instead, he moved slowly, placing each step with care, his heart steady, his mind calm. The scorpions scattered as he passed, leaving only scorched sand and a faint smell of smoke. The desert tested not only strength, but wisdom, and Cale passed. One night, when the moon hid entirely, he was visited by illusions more subtle yet more dangerous. Shadows of people he had known appeared before him. His parents, lost to time. The children who had once played beside him, now grown and calling for help. Even the villagers who had mocked him, their voices filled with accusation. They begged, they warned, they cried. Kyle felt the sting of loneliness and grief, but he did not falter. He whispered a silent prayer and walked past them, knowing that the desert would only let the worthy continue. On the 7th day, he came upon a dry wadi, its rocks jagged and unforgiving. He was weary, almost broken, thirst gnawing at his body, his cloak stiff with sand. But there, beneath a jagged stone, he discovered a small pool of water, clear and cool. It was a gift, or perhaps a test of gratitude. Cale knelt, drank deeply, and gave thanks. In that moment, he understood a truth that the desert had been teaching all along. Endurance, patience, and respect for the land were as important as courage. As he rose, he noticed the falcon feather in his cloak quiver, as if stirred by something unseen. Above, the sky was clear, and the wind carried a faint whisper, not of fear, but of guidance. Cale realized that the trials were not random hardships, but lessons, preparing him for the confrontation that lay ahead. The desert had stripped away distractions, illusions, and doubts, leaving only what was essential: the seeker, the signs, and the path to destiny. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in burning gold and crimson, Cale reached the crest of a great dune. From this height, he could see far into the desert's heart. The ruins of ancient caravans lay like skeletons, half buried in sand, and beyond them stretched a shadowed valley where the wind sang strange songs. He felt the echo of the hermit's riddle in his mind. In the shadow of the tallest dune, where the earth drinks the sun's last fire, there waits what you seek. Cale understood that he was drawing near to the next stage of his journey. The trials of the desert had tested his body, his mind, and his spirit. Now, only the true confrontation remained. The beast was closer than ever, its roar faint but unmistakable in the distance, carried by the wind like a challenge. And as the night fell, a calm settled over Cale. He had faced illusions, venom, heat, cold, and the whispers of memory, and he had endured. Each trial had shaped him, sharpened him, prepared him. He was no longer merely the outcast wandering the edges of the village. He was the seeker, the one chosen by prophecy, moving steadily toward the moment when silence would meet roar. The desert stretched before him, vast and infinite. But Cale's resolve was unwavering. The trials had proven one thing. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. And with that mastery, he would continue, step by step, until the signs led him to the weapon, the confrontation, and at last, the beast itself. Cale crested the tallest dune as the sun sank low, spilling amber and rose across the desert. The wind carried an almost imperceptible hum, as if the sands themselves whispered secrets long forgotten. He paused to rest, the black feather from the falcon tucked safely into his cloak, his mind replaying the hermit's riddle. In the shadow of the tallest dune, where the earth drinks the sun's last fire, there waits what you seek. Yet only those who carry silence in their hearts may take it. Silence. Kyle closed his eyes and breathed, feeling the desert around him settle like a great waiting beast. He understood now. The sword would not reveal itself to those who rushed, who demanded it. Only patience, only stillness, could draw it forth. He walked slowly down the dune slope, the sand soft beneath his feet. The shadow of the dune stretched long and deep, merging with the dunes beyond, a dark river in the molten light of the dying sun. At its base, Cale noticed a small depression, almost invisible, where the sand shifted differently, the grains arranged as though shaped by invisible hands. Kneeling, he brushed the sand aside with careful fingers. At first, there was nothing but glinting pebbles and dry earth. Then, as the last rays of sunlight touched the ground, a faint blue shimmer appeared beneath the sand. Heart quickening, Cale dug deeper, feeling the metal of the hilt beneath his palm. The blade was not long, yet it seemed to hum with a life of its own, vibrating subtly against his touch. It was the sword from his dream, the one buried beneath shifting sands, calling to him with a faint, otherworldly glow. He drew it slowly, reverently. The metal was cool and smooth, yet it pulsed faintly, as if recognizing the hand that held it. He felt an unspoken connection. This weapon was not merely forged by men, but shaped by destiny, by prophecy, by the unseen forces of the desert. The sword's hilt was engraved with intricate symbols, twisting lines that seemed alive when the light touched them. Kyle ran his fingers along the designs and felt a sudden clarity. Every trial of the desert, every mirage, every whisper of the wind had led him to this moment. The weapon was a key, a guide, and a challenge all at once. Yet the sword demanded something more than possession. Cale understood the hermit's final words. Only those who carry silence in their hearts may take it. To wield this weapon, he could not act with pride or rage. He must carry patience, humility, and resolve. The desert had tested him, and now he was entrusted with the culmination of that journey. As night began to fall, the first stars blinking into existence, Kyle held the sword upright. Its blue glow merged with the red-gold light of sunset, casting long shadows across the dunes. A faint vibration ran through the hilt into his arm, a silent song that seemed to echo the prophecy. The seeker has found his path. The beast awaits. He tested the blade against the sand, slicing easily through the grains as if cutting through air itself. The desert, which had been his adversary and teacher, now seemed to bow subtly, the wind whispering encouragement rather than mockery. The trials had strengthened him, and the weapon confirmed that he was ready. Yet Cale did not linger. The desert still held secrets, and the beast was near. Each step he had taken, each hardship endured, had led him here, but the greatest challenge was yet to come. The sword was not a guarantee of victory. It was a promise. A tool, yes, but one that required wisdom and courage to wield. As he walked back toward the dunes leading to the shadowed valley, Cale felt a new sense of purpose. His footsteps were steady, measured, silent. The hum of the sword accompanied him, faint but insistent, like a heartbeat in tune with his own. The desert had offered its lessons, and now he carried its power in his hands. Above, the stars burned brightly in the cold night sky, and the wind carried the distant echo of the beast's roar. Cale's lips moved in a silent vow, unspoken yet as binding as any oath. He would face the creature, not with haste or fury, but with the patience and resolve that had brought him this far. The sword was ready. The seeker was ready. And somewhere, in the distance, the shadowed valley awaited, holding the roar that had haunted the village for so long. Kyle approached the shadowed valley at dusk, the sword humming faintly in his hand. The air grew colder, carrying a scent that was neither earth nor water, but something older, something primal. The dunes sloped downward, revealing a deep, hollowed basin where the sand seemed almost black, as if the valley itself absorbed light. Here, the desert no longer whispered encouragement. It waited, tense and silent, as though holding its breath. And then he saw it. The beast emerged from the shadows, its form both familiar and impossible. Its body was massive, larger than any lion or serpent Cale had ever imagined. Scales shimmered like molten metal, covering parts of its sinewy frame, while fur, dark as midnight, bristled along its back. Its claws dug into the sand, leaving deep gouges that glowed faintly from the pressure of its weight. Its head was crowned with jagged horns, twisted like roots of a dead tree, and its eyes burned red-orange, twin fires that seemed to pierce through the desert night. Cale froze, feeling the roar of the creature in his chest before it even moved. Its growl rolled across the valley, a sound that shook the sand and rattled the rocks, echoing as if the mountains themselves joined in its fury. And yet, despite its size and power, the beast's movements were calculated, deliberate, not frantic, but full of awareness, as though it knew exactly what it could do to any who dared challenge it. For a long moment, the two regarded each other in silence. The desert seemed suspended, every grain of sand, every whispering wind, frozen in anticipation. Cale's heart pounded, but his hand remained steady on the sword's hilt. He remembered the lessons of the desert, the signs, the trials, and the whispered prophecy. When silence grows heavier than roar. The beast moved closer, its claws scraping the ground with a sound like rolling thunder. It sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, and Kyle could feel its gaze pressing into his soul. This was no mere animal, no mindless predator. It was cunning, ancient, and terrible, a force born of the desert itself. It was every whispered fear the village had ever carried, made flesh and fangs. Cale inhaled deeply, centering himself. The sword's hum grew louder, resonating with his heartbeat. He did not attack immediately. Instead, he held his ground, silent, watching, waiting. He recalled the desert trials, the illusions, the mirages, the scorpions and wind tests. All had prepared him for this exact moment. Patience, awareness, and restraint would be his weapons as much as the blade. The beast circled him slowly, claws pressing into the sand, tail flicking with measured force. Each step it took seemed to disturb the very air, creating waves that shifted the dunes around them. Cale noticed how it moved with intelligence, testing him, reading his reactions. He held his stance, breathing evenly, letting silence become heavier than the roar that surrounded them. Then, without warning, the beast lunged. Its movement was swift, like a shadow striking from nowhere, and Cale had to leap aside to avoid its claw. Sand flew into the air, swirling around them like a miniature storm. The roar filled the valley, shaking the ground beneath his feet, but Cale did not falter. He raised the sword, the faint blue glow illuminating the tips of the creature's claws as they sliced through the air. For what felt like hours, they circled, testing each other, Cale dodging, the beast feinting, each learning the other's rhythm. Neither committed fully, for the moment demanded patience. The desert had taught Cale well. Only when the creature showed pride or overconfidence would an opening appear. And in that careful waiting, the prophecy whispered in his mind, guiding him. Silence defeats roar. As night fell fully, stars burning above like countless eyes. Cale felt the moment coming. The beast paused, growling, its chest heaving, confident that its power alone would crush the untested boy. But Cale did not strike in anger. He waited, silent, every muscle coiled like a spring, every thought focused. The roar, the claws, the eyes, all became background to the stillness he carried within. The beast, sensing his patience, hesitated. It had faced few who did not fear it, fewer still who did not flee. And that hesitation, the smallest falter in its pride, was the first true advantage Cale had earned. The desert held its breath. The encounter, long awaited by prophecy and trial, was poised on the edge of fate. The night had fully fallen, the desert cloaked in shadows and silver light from a crescent moon. The valley was silent except for the distant echo of shifting sands and the low rumble of the beast's breath. Cale's feet sank into the dark, cold sand, every muscle tensed, his hand steady on the sword that had guided him through trials and omens. He could feel the desert itself leaning toward him, holding its breath, waiting. The beast circled, claws digging into the ground, eyes burning like molten coals. Its roar shattered the night air, rolling across the valley like thunder. Yet Cale stood firm. He remembered the prophecy. When silence grows heavier than roar, he understood now that the battle would not be won through fury alone. Patience and awareness were as sharp as the blade he wielded. With a sudden lunge, the beast struck, its massive claws scraping the sand where Cale had stood moments before. He leapt to the side, the sword's blue glow cutting a swath through the darkness. The desert erupted around them, sand flying like embers, wind twisting with the force of their struggle. Cale's first attempts to strike were cautious. He attacked not with anger, but with precision, aiming for the gaps in its armor-like scales and the soft spaces between its sinew. The beast roared, fury igniting its attacks, but Cale remained calm, moving like a shadow himself, his strikes measured and deliberate. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes passed like hours, each movement a test of endurance. The beast feinted and lunged, claws ripping sand, its roar shaking the dunes. Yet Cale neither flinched nor panicked. He realized that his advantage was not strength, but stillness. The more he held his silence, the more the beast's fury grew, a fire that threatened to consume it from within. It lunged again, more recklessly this time, pride blinding it. Cale dodged, rolling across the sand, and struck swiftly at a weak joint beneath its forelimb. The blade cut, drawing a deep, burning line across its flank. The beast roared, a sound so terrible it seemed to echo from the bones of the earth itself, but Cale did not shout in triumph. He simply moved, silent, letting the rhythm of the battle guide him. The valley seemed alive with tension. Sand rose and fell in waves, the wind itself carrying the scent of iron and smoke, the desert holding its breath as if witnessing an event older than memory. Cale's mind sharpened. He anticipated the beast's movements, guided by instinct honed through trials, signs, and dreams. Every feint, every strike, every silent step was a dialogue, a dance between the predator and the one chosen to face it. Hours could not have passed, yet fatigue gnawed at Cale. His arms ached, his feet burned from the sand, and sweat stung his eyes. But the key had been revealed. Patience would triumph over fury. The beast, sensing dominance, roared again, louder, a mistake. Pride clouded its judgment. Cale waited for the smallest falter, a shift of weight, a misstep, a pause born of overconfidence. And then it came. The beast lunged with a mighty claw, miscalculating its reach, and Cale moved silently, swiftly, drawing the sword in one decisive motion. The blade struck true, piercing the creature's heart. The roar stopped, replaced by a low rumble as the beast staggered, eyes wide, flames dimming in its gaze. Sand erupted around it as it fell, collapsing in a cloud of dust and ash. Cale dropped to one knee, breathing heavily, the sword still humming faintly, its glow fading as the desert absorbed the echoes of the battle. Silence reigned. The night was still, the stars watching like eternal witnesses. Cale felt no triumph, no pride, only a quiet understanding. The beast had been defeated not by rage or brute force, but by patience, silence, and the resolve to face fear without yielding to it. The valley seemed to sigh, the desert itself acknowledging the victory. Cale rose, the hum of the sword fading into the wind. He had faced the impossible and survived, but more importantly, he had honored the lessons of the desert and the signs that had guided him. In the distance, the dunes stretched like golden waves bathed in moonlight. The roar that had haunted the village for so long was gone, replaced by a whisper, a promise carried on the wind that balance had returned. Cale sheathed the sword, stepping carefully over the sand where the beast had fallen. The prophecy had been fulfilled. Silence had defeated roar, patience had overcome fury, and one had risen to face the darkness. Yet even in victory, Cale understood that the desert, like life, demanded humility. The beast was gone, but its memory lingered in the wind, in the shadows, and in the whispers of the dunes. And the villagers, far away, would one day hear the tale, quiet, whispered, and carried through generations, of the one who had faced the roar without fear. The valley lay cloaked in shadow, quiet now but for the faint hiss of settling sand. The beast, wounded and staggering, rose to its full, terrible height, chest heaving, eyes glowing like dying embers. Its pride had been wounded more than its body, and the roar that once shook the dunes now trembled with uncertainty. Cale stood firm, the sword gripped in both hands, its faint blue glow casting long streaks of light across the sand. His heart beat steadily, each pulse measured, each breath deliberate. He did not move with haste, for he knew the desert had already taught him the most vital lesson. Silence and patience, not fury, were the weapons that would see this battle to its end. The beast's gaze fixed upon him, sensing his confidence, testing his will. It lunged again, faster, more violently, claws slicing the sand and leaving deep gouges in its wake. Cale rolled aside, letting the momentum carry the beast past him. Each strike, each feint, each movement was deliberate, part of a rhythm that only patience could create. He waited, silent and calm, letting the creature's own overconfidence become its downfall. Hours seemed to stretch, yet the decisive moment arrived with sudden clarity. The beast, certain of its dominance, paused to roar once more, a sound that shook the valley like thunder rolling across the desert. Pride clouded its mind. It had misjudged Cale's patience as weakness. In that single instant, Cale saw the opening, the soft, unprotected space beneath the shoulder, where strength met vulnerability. He moved without sound, a shadow among shadows. The sword, guided by hand, heart, and destiny, arced through the air. There was no hesitation, no flourish, only the precision born of trials endured, signs followed, and patience mastered. The blade struck true, piercing the beast's heart with a quiet finality. The roar ceased instantly. The beast staggered, then fell to the sand with a sound like collapsing mountains, dust and debris scattering in a swirl around its massive form. Its eyes, once bright with fury and fire, dimmed to nothing, leaving only the stillness of night. Cale stood over it, chest heaving, not in triumph, but in reverent acknowledgement. The beast was vanquished, but it had demanded all of him to do so. For a long moment, there was only silence. The valley seemed to exhale, as though the desert itself had been holding its breath for centuries, waiting for this act to restore balance. Cale lowered the sword, feeling the hum fade, leaving only the memory of its guidance and the weight of the prophecy fulfilled. He did not celebrate. There was no song, no shout, no cry of victory, only quiet understanding. The battle had been more than a test of skill or courage. It had been a trial of patience, humility, and wisdom. He had faced the roar and met it with silence. He had confronted fear and mastered it rather than letting it master him. Cale knelt beside the fallen creature, placing a hand gently upon its massive flank. Though it had been a monster feared by all, he felt the echo of its ancient power, the wild majesty that had once ruled the dunes. It was over, yet he knew the memory of the beast would linger, whispered in the winds, and carried through the sands for generations to come. As the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the valley transformed. Shadows receded, and the sand shimmered under the pale light of morning. Cale rose, sheathing his sword, feeling the exhaustion of battle settle into a quiet strength. The desert, vast and eternal, stretched before him, witness to his triumph and the fulfillment of destiny. The villagers would one day hear the story, not in shouts or grand proclamations, but in whispered tales by firesides and in the careful words of elders. They would speak of the outcast who rose when no one else dared, who faced the impossible with patience and silence, and who delivered the final stroke that ended the reign of terror. Cale turned toward the horizon, the wind carrying the faint echo of the prophecy. When silence grows heavier than roar, one shall rise again. He had risen. He had walked between shadow and flame, and though the desert stretched endlessly before him, he knew that he had fulfilled the first part of his journey. The beast lay still, the roar finally silenced, and the world seemed to settle into balance once more. The desert lay quiet, its vast expanse bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The dunes, once restless with the beast's passage, now shimmered with a calm that seemed almost miraculous. The air carried the faint scent of warmed sand and distant earth, and the wind whispered gently through the hollow valleys, as if acknowledging the triumph that had taken place under the moonless night. Cale emerged from the shadowed valley, the sword still sheathed at his side. He had faced the impossible, endured the trials of the desert, and delivered the final stroke that silenced the roar of the monstrous beast. Yet he did not feel triumph. Victory, he realized, was not loud or celebratory. It was quiet, steady, like the settling of dust after a storm, like the soft whisper of the wind over the dunes. The journey back to the village was long, but the desert seemed different now, less hostile, less testing. The signs that had once guided him now felt like old friends, guiding him gently rather than challenging him. Each step carried him closer to the people he had once walked among, the villagers who had feared the roar of the beast more than they had dared to face it. When he finally arrived, the village was still quiet. Few dared to stir before sunrise, and the streets were empty save for the occasional goat or hen. But word travels quickly in whispers, and Cale could feel the villagers' awareness of his presence, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and cautious hope. Mothers peeked from behind curtains, children pressed their faces against doorways, and elders leaned upon their staffs, sensing that something had changed, though none yet fully understood how. Cale did not call for recognition. He did not demand applause or thanks. He walked among the village quietly, as he had always done, his presence a subtle reassurance rather than a proclamation. People noticed him, of course. Whispers followed his footsteps. It is he, the one who faced the beast. The words spread, soft as sand over dunes, reaching ears not to boast but to remember. That night, by the firelight, the elders spoke in hushed tones to the younger generation. They told the story of the outcast boy who had walked into the desert, who had followed signs and omens, endured trials, and emerged to face the monster that had haunted the village for so long. They spoke not of glory, but of patience, silence, and courage, the quiet virtues that had allowed one to rise when all others faltered. Children huddled closer, their eyes wide and shining, imagining the desert, the sword, and the monster that had seemed unstoppable. They whispered the tale to one another, careful not to speak too loudly, for even in the telling, the story demanded reverence. It became a legend of silence and patience, of courage tempered with wisdom, and of the mysterious power of destiny fulfilled. Cale himself remained a quiet figure at the edge of the gatherings, observing, listening, and offering guidance only when necessary. He did not become a leader in the conventional sense, nor did he seek titles or praise. His role had been fulfilled by action, rather than words, and the villagers learned that true strength often dwells in silence, in deeds unseen, and in courage quietly born. The desert, too, seemed to remember. Winds shifted less harshly, dunes settled into gentle waves, and the distant echo of the beast's roar faded completely. Yet in the wind's whisper, those who listened closely could still feel a lingering presence, a memory of the trials, of the courage, and of the boy who had risen to face what none else could. It was a story carried softly across the sands, repeated by mothers and elders, preserved not in grand monuments but in the quiet recollection of hearts and minds. And so the legend endured, whispered from one generation to the next, of the outcast who walked between shadow and flame, of the sword unearthed beneath shifting sands, of the patience and silence that conquered the roar. Though Kyle faded into the quiet rhythm of village life, his story lived on, not in song or shout, but in the hushed reverence of those who remembered, a testament to courage that required no applause, only understanding. The beast was gone. The desert calm and the whispers remained.